So we're finishing up the Mishnah on Daf Nunam at Beis, the last three lines in the Mishnah. Rabbi Nechemia Omer, Achas Be'ila ve'achas Chalitza. He's equating Be'ila and Chalitza in this context. And since we said Ein Achar Chalitza Klum, which means that if there was a mimer after Chalitza, it would not require a get. And the same din will apply for Be'ila. So again, if Chalitza was done first, and also we had cases where it was Be'emta and Besof, all those three cases, then we said that mimer afterwards is meaningless and it doesn't generate a chiyuv get. And the same thing with regard to Bia, Bein Betchila, Bein Be'emta, Bein Besof. So whether or not he started with Be'ila and then he gave a get, or he did a maimar, or first he had a get, then he did Be'ila, then he did a maimar, or he did a maimar, get and a maimar, and then Be'ila. In all those cases, Ein Achreha Klum. She does not need Chalitza. In other words, he used Mafkia, the Zikas Yibum through Bia, through Yibum. And when he divorces her, she will be able to marry anyone she wants without Chalitza. The same thing would apply if, let's say, Reuven was married to two wives, and after Reuven's death, Shimon was miyabim one of them. He had a be'ila with one of them. Even if he would do mimer with the other one, the other tzara, the mimer would not be meaningful, would not be valid to require a get. And also we said that if a person does maimar, he's not allowed to marry the krovos of the Yevamot to which he gave maimar, but that doesn't apply in a case where he did bia with one of the two Yevamots. So here the Masechet, he now offers a summary of the machlokes between Chachamim and Rabbi Nechemia. So first we'll talk about the case where he gave a get and then he was Baal. Or let's say after Nesinas get, he gave Maimar. Does she need Chalitza? She certainly needs get because the Be'ila is a full-fledged Ishus and it requires a get. That Be'ila is called a Be'ila Psula because once he gave a get or he did a Maimar, then he's not allowed to be Miyabim her. So Kohen Chachamim, since it's a Be'ila Psula, therefore it is not, again, all of this is the Rabbanan, as we said many times, it's not enough to be Mafkia, the Zika completely, and therefore the Yevamah needs Chalitza together with a get in order to allow her to get married. According to Rabbi Nechemia, there's no pagam, so to speak, there's no deficiency in the kinyan that's generated by the Be'ila. So that means the Zika is completely removed by virtue of the Be'ila. And it doesn't matter in what sequence, it's as if he started with Be'ila and it was Kedasu Kindin. And therefore, even though he's not allowed to remain married to her because it was a Be'ila Psula in the case where he started with a get or a Maimar, but nevertheless, once the Be'ila removes the Zika completely and she's a full-fledged Eishesish, she does not need a get. I mean, all she needs is a get. She doesn't need anything beyond a get in order to allow her to get married. So too, in a case where he gave her a get, and then he was Boel, and then he did a Maimar, that would again be an Afkamina according to Chachamim, since the Bia is a Bia Psula because he started with a get. Therefore, we consider it as a pagam, some sort of deficiency in his kinyan, and he was not mafkia the zika completely, and therefore, if he was kona with a maimar, she'll need a get. Whereas, according to Rabbi Nechemia, there's no kinyan bia, there's no pagam in the kinyan bia, even as a result of the get, and therefore the kinyan bia is complete. She's an Eishes Ish. And the mimer that comes subsequently does not require a get. And it's as if he started with Bia, which was Kedasu Kedin, and that's Mafkia the Zika Lagamre. And therefore, if afterwards he does a mimer, there's no need for a get. So that's the end of the Mishnah now. We can start the Gemara. The Gemara is going to try to explain the Takanas Chachamim that a get is meaningful in the case of Yibum, and it makes it impossible. It generates an Isu Yibum, although, again, Midoraisa, if not for the Takanas Chachamim, that would not be so. A get in the case of a Yevam is meaningless. So why is it that the Chachamim established this takana that the get should be meaningful to generate a blockage on Yibum? And for the same token, Maimar. If he does Maimar, that also blocks Yibum in the case of the Tzara, right? He could be Miyabim, the one that he gave Maimar to, but he would not be able to be Miyabim, the Tzara, who did not receive Maimar. Also, keep in mind that the Maimar now generates a Chiv get in addition to Chalitza, whereas according to the Torah law, Chalitza would certainly be sufficient, but by virtue of the Rabbanon upgrading and recognizing the Maimar, she needs, in addition to Chalitza, she needs a get. Now we go back to the beginning of the Mishnah and the machlokas between Rama Gamliel and the Chachamim. So at some point we may have to review the Mishnah again. It's a very long, complicated Mishnah, but maybe we'll work backwards. Ad kan lo pligi. When is there a machlokas between Rama Gamliel and the Chachamim? El beget achar get, umaymar achar maymar. So it means the Rav Gamliel holds ein get liachar get, ein maimar liachar maimar. In other words, to repeat the same action twice, according to Rav Gamliel, the second action is meaningless, and the Chacham recognize get achar get. Aval get echad b'yevama umaimar echad b'yevama mahani. The Gemara is establishing that everybody agrees, even Rabbi Gamliel would concede, that if there was a case of a get with one Yevama, so he did a Maisa Gerishin with one Yevama, and with the other Yevama, Maimar, which is a Maisa Kiddushin, Mahani. What does that mean, Mahani? We will recognize the get to generate an Isur on the Yavam, meaning what happens is the get, even though on a Torah level it's not Mafkia Zika because you need Chalitza to be Mafkia Zika, the Rabbanon upgraded and recognized the get to be Mafkia the Zika, and once you Mafkia the Zika, then she becomes again, all the Rabbanon and Eishes Ach, because there's no Zika. The same thing in Maimar. Maimar, the Rabbanon recognized as Kiddushin, so that she needs a get. If he doesn't want to be miyabim her, and he wants to terminate that relationship, even though he gave a Maimar, she would need a get. Also, keep in mind that we said that the Maimar generates an Isur Yibum on the Tzara. So again, after Maimar, he could marry and be miyabim the one he gave Maimar to, but not to the Tzara, the other wife. And again, all this is true, even though on a Doraisa level, according to Torah law, you can only be mafkia zikas Yibum with Chalitza, or obviously Yibum, through Be'ila, and she becomes Ishto. But nevertheless, the Rabbanon recognized get as if the get would be mafkia zika, so that no longer can he live with her because she's like a chalutza. And also the Rabbanon recognized Maimar as if they were Kiddushin, so that she needs a get. And he would not be able to be miyabim the tzara. By time Omer Rabbanan get the Yevamah Mahani. Why did the Rabbanan institute this takana to recognize a get and to generate an Isra on the Yavam to be miyabim her when the Torah doesn't recognize that get at all? Meaning, according to Torah law, after he gave a get to the Yevamah, he can still be miyabim her. The get didn't register at all. And the Rabbanan is saying that after the get itself is like a chalitza, and it generates an Isra on the Yavam. And the Gemara answers, Mishum de Mahani bi Alma. Since get, in general, removes ishus of a full-fledged ishus each, the Rabbanan therefore recognized the power of get in the case of a yibum. The iyamrit lo mahani, if we're going to say that the get that he gave his yivama is meaningless, as if it didn't take place at all, then Amri, maybe the spectator would mistakenly think that get lotzia, v'chalitza lotzia, that get is meaningful in the case of an isha to remove the isha eishes each. Chalitza is meaningful in the case of Yevama to remove the isha of Yevama l'shuk, and therefore, me to get lo mahani, since a get is not meaningful in the case of a Yevama, cannot be matir ha to get married in the shuk, even though again it would be matir and eishes each to be married to the shuk. The spectator would mistakenly conclude that the Isur of Yevama l'shuk is more chamur than the Isur of eishes each. Why is that? Because you have two different meisim. You have a get and a chalitza. And a get is meaningless to be matir a Yevama, whereas it would be meaningful to be matir an eishes each. So the spectator comes to the mistaken conclusion that the Isur of Yevama l'shuk is more chamur than eishes each. All right, get doesn't work to be matir the Isur of Yevama l'shuk. So what's so terrible if the spectator comes to that mistaken conclusion? Now they're going to say that chalitza nami lo mahani. If you see that a get is not meaningful to be matir the Isur chamur of Yevama l'shuk, whereas get would be matir, so chalitza is not as strong and as powerful as get, so lo mahani. And what conclusion will they come to? That the Torah requires in the case of Yevama l'shuk two meisim. Number one, that she receive a get. Number two, that she receive chalitza. Okay, we'll see why that's a terrible thing if people mistakenly think that a Yevama l'shuk to be matir her to the shuk needs both chalitza and yibum. But again, let's just see, before we get to that, let's get to the logical process of the intellect of the spectator. He thinks that, look, if get is not enough to be matir Yevama l'shuk, that makes Yevama l'shuk more chomer than eishes each. So when the Torah says chalitza in the case of Yevama l'shuk, the Torah meant to add chalitza to get. And you cannot be matir Yevama l'shuk without the two together, A plus B, which is get plus chalitza. So what's so terrible about such a conclusion? The asi lemival achar chalitza. He's going to think, the Yavam, that since I need to give her both get and chalitza, if I gave her chalitza alone, that would not be enough to be matir her as Yevama l'shuk. It means the zikas yibum is still intact. He's going to give her chalitza, and then he's going to decide, you know what, I still have an option of yibum. Why? Because I didn't give her a get. So the fact that the spectator thinks that she needs not only chalitza but also a get, that's a very dangerous business. Because then, in the mind of the Yavam, if he gave her get without chalitza, that's not a problem, because einochinami, get without chalitza would not be matir l'shuk. It would not remove the zika, and therefore, if he went ahead and he decided to be miyavim her after the get, we'd give him credit for that, because the Torah would say, "Oh, you're mekayim mitzvah yibum." But what about a situation in which he gave a chalitza and he didn't give a get, and he thinks that chalitza is not enough to be mafkia zikas yibum, she needs a get. So he thinks that as long as he hasn't delivered the get, he still allowed himself space to decide to change his original position and now be miyabima. And Osi Lemival Achar Chalitza, he gave a Chalitza. Now he thinks that since there was only Chalitza, it's not enough to be Matal Shuk, and therefore he is the one that she's Muteris low. If she's Asur Shuk until she gets a get, it means she's Muteris low to the Yavam, and therefore will violate the law of Asher Lo Yivnes Beso as Beis Achiv. Kevin Slobana Shuvein Aroi and Rashoy Livnos. So Rabbanan made a takana that after the get is given to the Yevama, ye osar all of liyabimos. It'll block and prohibit him from yibum, and therefore mitoch kach lo yavo liyabim achar chalitza. He'll never come to be miyabim or after chalitza, because the Chachamim said that once he gave her a get, he's not allowed to be miyabim. Okay, now that's as far as get is concerned. Why did the Chachamim say that after get he's not allowed to be miyabim? Now we're going to ask, what about the din of Maimar? And again, as we said before, in the din of Maimar, she needs a get in addition to chalitza to be mater al shuk, and he's not allowed to be miyabim the tzara. My taima omer abonon Maimar b'yavama mahani mishum the mahani bi'alma. So in general, Maimar, Kesef, and Shtar is valid to create Kiddushin. So the Chachamim wanted to equate Yevama with other Nashim. Any woman who, even if, obviously if she's not a Yevama, then she's Nikdes B'Kesef U'B'Shtar. And now they wanted to establish a uniformity between Yevama and Shar Nashim, such that even in Yevama, Kesef or Shtar is a Kinyan. Lo mahani, if you're going to allow this Yevama to get married without a get after she received Maimar, it's Amri. What would the spectator mistakenly conclude? That Maimar, which means Kesef or Shtar, is meaningful for a regular woman, right? Aisha nicknames B'Kesef U'Shtar. And Bia is also meaningful. That's the third option, alternative method of Liknos. Umi de Maimer lo mahani, Bia nami lo mahani. Again, it's a very strange conclusion that the spectator arrives at, but he thinks, wait a minute, if in general in Kinyanim, for an Isha Bialma, Kesef Ishtar is meaningful, but in the case of Yevama, in the case of Maimar, it's not meaningful, then Bia, which is meaningful Bialma for a regular Isha, would not be meaningful in the case of Yevama. Bia Nami Lo Mahanya. Okay, so what happens now? Again, I don't know. I would ask Akasha on this Toeh, on this Roeh, what would work in Yibum? The Osi Lemival Achar Bia. So what mistake would possibly happen? So we're getting back into the mindset of the Yavam, and the Yavam thinks that after Be'ilah, he can still be B'Yabim, one of the Tzaros. The Osi L'Mival, we have to add the Tzara, Achar Bia. Now, we know that the Torah allows Yibum only for one of the Yevamos. And This is called bias echadu bona ve'enu bona shtei bat. And now he's going to think that after he had bia, and the Yavam thinks that the bia, like kesef and shtar, is not meaningful, and then he'll come to bia with one of the tsaros. Just 1 second. Asi lemival. Achar bia. Right, so what we're doing is we're setting up an Isser of Maimar, that Maimar generates an Isser vis-a-vis the other Tzara, because if you didn't recognize Maimar to generate an Isser after the other Tzara, the Yavam will think that he could be Miyabim the Tzara even after Bia, with, right, let's say there's Rachel and Leah, that both fell for Yibum, he was Miyabim Rachel, and he thinks he could be Miyabim Leah. Why? Because if he gave Rachel Kesef or Shtar, he's allowed to be Miyabim Leah before the Takon of Maimar. And why is that? Because Kesef and Shtar are not enough. So he would think even after Bia with Rachel, it's not enough. I just don't understand one piece of the puzzle here. Maybe, gentlemen, you could help me with this. If he thinks that Bia doesn't work with Rachel, then what is he gaining by doing Bia with Leah? Well, what does he think? That the Torah just gave carte blanche, that he's allowed to, at what maybe he thinks that Yibum is not a Kinyan, it's only a heter Bia for the sake of Lahakim Shem Liyachiv.
The problem, if he did the second Bia, there would be...
That's a violation.
Yeah, I mean, there would be...
no, but I'm just saying, I'm trying to figure violation. Out his... Yeah, I'm investigating, I'm interrogating this guy. He's on the witness stand. I'm trying to figure out, he equated Bia with Kesef and Shtar. After Kesef and Shtar, he could be Miyabim, according to the Torah law, any one of the Yevamot. So he's going to think that so too after Bia, which normally works Bisha B'Alma, he could be Baal on a... So at what point in his mind does the Torah Nachinami recognize Yibum, Hafka, Zika? If it's not a Bia, so what is it? Is it just sort of like a free love society? You know, he could have a relationship with any one of his brother's wives? And what does this go on endlessly? I mean, at what point do we settle down? The dust settles and he has a Kinyan and she's an Eishasish. I'm just trying to figure out the mindset of this guy. Let me see if there's anything here in the notes by any chance. And you look in your notes. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think, Steve, you have notes. What about you, Jeff? You have notes?
I do, but I'm not seeing anything on this issue.
Ah, okay. That doesn't surprise me because the Masechet also has nothing. Just going to read again the translation here just to make sure I didn't miss anything. Asi lemival yispar hayavam shemutalo lival es achas minashos achiv hameis achar bia levado she'asa beisha acheres shel achiv v'yavar al numakos space achiv she'enu bon el ba'isechad akein tiknu chachamim shemaimar ukinyin kesef o shtar yikne Yevamot, lesser all of liyabim es tzaros. We talk lo yavo livo es tzaras hayevama shebal kvar. No, nothing more than that. I mean, just basically brings us back to where we were. Since Kesef and Shtar doesn't block his yibum with the tzara, so too Bia would not block his yibum with the tzara. I'm just thinking, this Just I want to understand the logic of this fellow. At what point in his mind does Yibum finally kick in? Maybe it's an issue of kavana. Let's just think. Maybe he didn't have kavana for the Kinyan Ishus with the first wife, let's call her Rachel, and then he has Kinyan, a kavana Kinyan with Leah. But he doesn't realize that once he had Bia with Rachel, he's not allowed to have any relationship with Leah. Okay. Now we're going to discuss the case of a man who gave a get to one of the two Yevamos, and then he had Bia with the other Yevamo. That was the machlokus between Chachamim and Rabbi Nechemia at the end of the Mishnah. So there was a Bia after get, or there was a Bia after Maimar. So again, you have Rachel and Leah. He gave Rachel a get, or he gave Rachel kesef or shtar, and then he went ahead and he had Bia with Leah. And now the question is there a need for chalitza? Rabbi Nechemia says, no. There's no need for chalitza because ein liachar Bia klum. Right? He had a yibum now with Leah, and that yibum with Leah is 100% valid. So there's no need for chalitza. All we need would be a get if he decides to divorce her. My timer, Omer Rabbanon, Bia Psula Yesh Achrei Klum. So now we're talking about the Chachamim of Rab Nechemia, and they hold that Bia Psula means that once he gave a get or a maimar to Rachel, he's not allowed to be miyabim Leah. As we discussed earlier, the two takonos, one takona is that after get, he's not allowed to be miyabim. And after maimar, he's not allowed to be miyabim. And he went ahead and he violated that. He certainly was miyabim. So that's called a bia psula. Is yesh achrei klum, which means that the bia is not totally, again, the Rabbanan is not totally effective. It's not a kinyan gamur. It's rather a kinyan pagum. It's a deficient kinyan. And on the one hand, it does effectuate a bittul zika on one level, that's on a doraisa level, because he was baalel, he was miyabimha. But on the other hand, there's still a zikas yibum because the bia was psula. There's still some vestige of a zikas yibum, and therefore she needs not only a get but also chalitza. That's the Rabbanan of Rab Nechemia. So my timer, Amri. So I'm going to assume that the word Amri is the answer to my timer. And why did they make this takana? What kind of a mikshal are they trying to prevent? She Yizbru, I'm reading the commentary, he says, She Yizbru lahatir es hayevama la yavam b'mokom shekfar asura olav. So I guess what we're going to do now is we're going to talk about bia psula on a doraisa level, and why the Rabbanan would equate a case of bia psula d'Rabbanan with bia psula doraisa. That's, I think, what we're going. That's the direction we're going to take. I biachar get he, right? In the case where he gave a get to one of his Yevamos, and then after the get, he was ba on the second Yevama. Is Gzera, the Chachamim instituted Gzera, right, to disqualify his Bia, Achar get. Why? Mishum Bia Achar Chalitza. So we're now equating Bia Liachar get with Bia Liachar Chalitza. Again, that's in the mind of the spectator. So what happened in the Doraisa case? That's the real model, and then we're going to try to see where the Gzera falls in another scenario that's similar. But in a primary model, what happens is he gave Chalitza, which means that now she's allowed to marry anyone she wants. And then he was Ba'aleh. Second, Bia Li'achar Chalitza. So again, if you're going to allow Bia Liachar get, then mistakenly he's going to think that you could allow Bia after Chalitza. So I'm not sure if this has anything to do with what we discussed before, that he thinks you need both Chalitza and get. I don't know. Let's see. So again, if you would allow him to be Miyabe after get, so then he thinks he can be Miyabim after Chalitza. Kishem shehuta liyavama liachar get is gam liachar Chalitza hutra linase shehutra linase l'shuk adaini muteres gam liyavam. Meaning that the Chalitza is matir her to the shuk and to the yavam in his mind, right? Because he's equating Chalitza with get. Or get with Chalitza, if you want to say it that way. So he's thinking, well, look, right? He's equating Chalitza with get. Let's do it that way. That, look, you told me in the case of get, since the Torah didn't recognize that get, he's allowed to be Miyabimar after the get. So I'm going to say that he's allowed to be Miyabimar after Chalitza as well. And then he violates the Isur of Asher Lo Yivne. Kevin Shlo Bona Shuvenu Rashay Livnus. That's get. So again, we begin to understand when he gives a get to one of the Yevamos and subsequently he's Baal, the second Yevama, we assume that that get has to generate an Isur on Yivu. Because if you're going to completely ignore and disqualify the get, then he'll think that even after a Chalitza, he's allowed to have a relationship with her, and then he violates the Isur of Asher Lo Yivne. Now let's talk about another case. Bia Achar Maimer he. Let's say he gave Maimer to the first Yevama, and now he was born the second Yevama. So what's the problem with that? Meaning, why do the Chachamim against Rabbi Nechemia insist that the one who receives the Maimer needs a get? Zera Bia Achar Maimar Mishum Bia Achar Bia. Which I assume, again, I didn't read the commentary, but I assume means that if you're going to allow after Maimer to Rachel, Yibum to Leah, then he's going to think that even Bia, which is no worse than Maimer, no worse than Kesef Shtar, it's exactly equal. If he had Bia with Rachel, he can have Bia with Leah. Which again, that comes back to my old question about, what's going on? Does he have a laissez-faire green light to have relations with all the Yevamots? So Gzeira, let's read it inside. Bia achar maimar. Right, there was maimar and then bia. Mishum bia achar bia. We're afraid of bia achar bia. Sha'asa bitzoras hayevama. Sheyomu she'im bi'ila so kone es hayevama. Afilu achrei sha'asa bitzarasa kinyan kesef ushtar. Shemo ilim beishas ish. Biotzas beget bilvad. Im kain gam achrei shebal es hatzara. Mutalo livlo yevamino sefes. V'yavral anilma mikosav espace. Achiv sheinu bonish nebatim yifke beishas ish. Shalo b'makom mitzvah. So that's more or less what we anticipate. Okay, what are we up to now? So again, if there was bia after get or after maimar, the Rabbanon made this takana that in addition to the get, you'll need chalitza. So that's a case of bia liachar get or liachar maimar. That requires chalitza. Now, we're going to ask the following question. Let's say after he gave a get or maimar to Rachel, he gave chalitza to Leah. My time Omer Rabbanon, Hai chalitza psula, ein achrea klum. What does that mean? Ein achrea klum. Just 1 second. Right, we said if there was bia to the first, and then there was bia to the second. So no, we explained why if there was maimar and the gzeira was the biachar maimar, mishum biachar bia. So what's the Gemara asking now? My timer omer abanon hai chalitza psula ein achrea klum. Hai chalitza psula ein achrea klum. He says, "V'lo tiknu shachalitza lo tafkia," double negative here. The lo tafkia legamre es hazika. Yoel get achrel lesar krovos. Chen yoel maimer lahatzrik get. And I don't have what the Gemara is asking. Second. I shut off the heat because I know Jeff would complain. This time I did a Jeff move here. So again, Rabbosai, are we all on the same page? I'm trying to rack my brain, say, what does it mean? Umay taima omer abonon hai chalitza psula, which I assume means chalitza after get or maimar, ein achrea klum. So what's ein achrea klum? He gives you a negative here. Velo tiknu, we're trying to find out why they didn't make a takana. Shachalitza lo tafkia legamre es hazika the yoel get lachrea. He doesn't say that you require a get. He's saying the yoel get lachrea lesser krovos v'chein yoel mamar that's a get. So wait, let's go over this. So if it was a get or a mimer and then bia, so we said that bia is a bia psula. Just have to go over the dinim here 1 second. So again, if it's a bia psula, again, I'm just backtracking for a second because if we don't understand the previous my timer, we're not going to understand this my. Before in the previous my timer, we're trying to understand the chachamim. My timer omer abonon bia psula yesh achrea klum. So I don't know if you can validate or substantiate what I'm about to say now. That in the case of a bia psula, he will not be able to be matir leah without chalitza. Is that correct? We should know that. So again, I hope I'm right. Just if you can check me out, I would be appreciative. He gave maimar or get, and then he was baal the leah, right? The second one. So we said that bia psula yesh achrea klum, which means that if he wants to be matir leah, it's not enough that he give her a get; he needs to give her also chalitza. So the Gemara is asking, if that be the case, let's be consistent. And in the case where after Maimar or Get, he gave Chalitza to the second Yevamot, meaning to Leah, Chalitza itself alone would not be enough to be Matir, or we should require a Get. And why would we require a Get? Because the Chalitza itself is a Chalitza Psula. But I'm not sure if that makes any sense. Maybe, see, I don't know what happens. He gave Mimer to the first one. In the case of Bia Psula, Yesh Achrei Klum. Can you help me out over here, Rabosai? This is very lonely here, this existence. What does it mean? Bia Psula Yesh Achrei Klum. Can you just translate those words? Maybe you have a commentary there. Even a simple English commentary, just Bia Psula Yesh Achrei Klum. Right, in the Gemara itself, it's 7 lines up before the end of Nunamid Beis. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Can you read it for me, Jeff? 7 lines up before the end of Nunamid Beis. Bia Psula Yesh Achrei Klum. You'll have to unmute yourself. That's the only problem. No, I still can't hear it. Jeff, you have an English translation? Can't hear it. Maybe I can do something here. No.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, usually if you hit the space bar, it unmutes, but I guess not. All right, so I'm having a problem finding the spot where we are.
Again, we're on Nunamid Beis.
Right.
And we're counting up 7 lines from the end. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And it says, Bia Psula Yesh Achrei Klum.
Okay.
Is there a translation? If there's a footnote, that's even better. But even right now, I'll be mistapik b'muad. If you give me a translation, I'll be happy.
Right. Yeah. So, sorry.
I wish I understood what your problem is. I have no clue. Do you have the actual physical book in front of you?
Yes,
Or
yes.
You do.
Yes.
So you have Nunamid Beis.
Yes.
And if you count up 7 lines up from the bottom, do you see the Hebrew at least?
Yeah, yeah. No,
Yeah.
I have that. I'm just looking for the,
Translation.
yeah.
Usually they have the Hebrew and then the English right next to it.
Well, sort
Not
of.
in that one.
Yeah. So,
Yesh achreha klum. No?
Yeah, so I'm looking at Ibia Achre Get He.
We're a little bit before that, like 5 words before that.
Yeah.
Bia psula yesh achreha klum. Do you identify those 5 words?
Okay, yeah.
Is there an English translation?
Yes, okay. And for what is the reason the rabbis say that deficient cohabitation, that there is validity to something performed after it? And the note is the cohabitation leaves an element of Zika intact, and as we've learned in the Mishnah concerning the case of 2 Yevamos and 1 Yavam, if he performed a mamar with this one and then cohabited with that one, this requires 2 gittin and chalitza. We do not say that the cohabitation dissolved the Zika and eliminated the need for chalitza.
Wait, the last line, if you could read it, we do not say
that the cohabitation dissolved the Zika and eliminated the need for chalitza.
Good. So, okay. Right now I'm very excited because I see we're on the right track. So when the Gemara says, Yesh achre klum means we require chalitza. It's not sufficient to give a get. So he has to give a get to the first Yevama because of Maimar. He's got to give a get to the second one because of Bia. And now they need chalitza as well. The Bia should have eliminated the Zika. And we don't need chalitza at all. So that's what the Gemara asks my timer. And then the Gemara continues with an entire explanation of what we're afraid of. And let's just, maybe we'll summarize that piece. And we said that if, he might consider Amri, again, we'll read it again, Ibia achar hageti is gzera bia achar haget mishum bia liachar chalitza. And Ibia liachar maimer he gzera mishum bia achar maimer mishum bia achar bia. Okay. So now we're up to Umaytaima Omer Rabbanon Chalitza Psula Ein Achrea Klum, which is let's count up here. 1, 2, 3, 4 lines up from the bottom of the Amud. My timer Omer Rabbanon Hai Chalitza Psula Ein Achrea Klum. Can you read that one? Four lines up from the bottom.
Okay. And for what reason did the rabbis say concerning deficient chalitza that there is no validity to anything after it? Okay. All right. We may say as follows: what should the rabbis decree? Should they decree that the chalitza after a get not be fully effective because of the concern of chalitza after chalitza?
Oh, now you lost me. This is way, way above my level. Okay, so let's go slowly. We'll take it. We got to backtrack here. Right? Chalitza psula ein achrea klum.
Right.
So if I understand correctly, we're talking about a case where he gave a get or maimar to the first Yevama and then chalitza to the second Yevama. And now we're wondering, why shouldn't we give a stamp, a status to the chalitza as a chalitza psula? What would be the implications, the ramifications of a chalitza psula if we classified this chalitza as a chalitza psula? It would mean that if afterwards he gave her a maimar, then she would need a get for the maimar. And yet that's not so. Ein achrei klum. And the Gemara is going to try to figure out why is it that in the case of Bia Psula, we said yesh achrei klum, and we're going to require chalitza, but in the case of chalitza psula, where there was a get or maimar to the first yevama and there was chalitza to the second, ein achar chalitza klum. So that anything that happens after the chalitza, for example, maimar in that same yevama, he gave maimar to the same yevama that he gave chalitza to, that maimar is completely invalid, doesn't register, and she doesn't need a get.
That's just Rabbi Akiva?
Yeah, I guess we're going to have to introduce Rabbi Akiva because, again, Ein Kedushin Tovsim B'chayvei Lav, because after he gave a chalitza, becomes chayvei lav. That's what I'm assuming. And yet we're saying now that in the case of a bia psula, we're going to require chalitza. Why shouldn't we require a get in the case of a chalitza psula? Meaning, if there was maimar after the chalitza, so he gave a maimar to the first yevama, we'll call her Rachel, and that generates an Isur Yibum and passes the chalitza, therefore, of Leah. And yet we're going to say the following, that chalitza is a valid chalitza such that there's no room for requiring a get after the maimar, after the chalitza, right? The whole chadgadi here. Meaning after he gave chalitza to Leah, if subsequently he gave her maimar, we will not require a get. The question is, does that fit in with your reading of the translation? If you can read it one more time.
And for what reason did the rabbis say concerning deficient chalitza, there is no validity to anything after it?
Does he expand on that? Does he embellish that maybe in a footnote?
Yeah, that this is the question. If one performed chalitza with a yavama after a get was given, or after mamar was performed with her co-wife, it is fully effective, and a subsequent get or mamar is void.
Oh, wait a second. Those are the key words. Wait, Jeff, if I can. Sorry.
Yeah.
And a subsequent get or maimar
is void.
Is void. Hold on. Don't say another word. Let me just digest that. So a subsequent get. Well, let's think. What does he mean by a subsequent get? What would be? Well, 1 second. I'm trying to figure out what I mean. Maimar I understand, but what's get? A subsequent get, meaning you can't marry the relatives of your grusha, but you can't marry the relatives of your chalutza anyway. So what are we talking about in the get?
So the note continues.
Yeah, go ahead.
Why did the rabbis not decree regarding chalitza as they did regarding cohabitation, that when deficient, it is only partially effective? And then the Gemara goes on to clarify that.
Right, the Gemara is going to answer that question. But I'm stuck with the question here. If he would have mentioned just maimar, I think I could have survived that, because if the chalitza was not valid because it's a chalitza psula, then there's room for maimar, because she still is a yavama, and the maimar would generate a requirement of a get. But what I don't understand exactly is what he means by a get, what would be the havamina here that if after chalitza he gave her a get? So I'm just missing one point over here. After chalitza he gave her a get.
I mean, was a thought that the second one the one that he gave chalitza to also needed a get in order to become mutter to the shuk?
Oh, that's what I thought, but that's not what they're saying. They're saying something totally different. They're asking whether the get is valid or not. You and I are asking a different question. Maybe there should be a requirement of a get because the chalitza is a chalitza psula. But that question I don't think is relevant. I'll tell you why. Even though initially I thought just like you thought, I don't think it's relevant to say that after a man gives chalitza to a yevama, he would have to give her a get. I mean, what point would there be in giving a get after he gave a chalitza? But I think what they're saying is something different, that if he went ahead and he gave her a get after chalitza, then that get should be meaningful because the chalitza is a chalitza psula. But I'm just trying to think what repercussions would there be if Einach Hinami and the Havamina which should validate the get. What would that mean? Maybe it means she can't marry Cohen? No, she can't marry Cohen because she's a chalutza anyway. What it means that he can't marry her sister or her mother or her daughter, that's true after chalitza anyway. So I'm not sure what the get in the Havamina of the Gemara, in the Kasha of the Gemara would have added. That's the point I'm missing here. All right. So let's see. Where are we holding now? All right, just one more minute and then we'll finish. And then he says, Amri. So I think Amri means this is the answer to our question. My ligzar. My ligzar means ein makom l'chashash. There's no room for chashash. Shemachmasa, because of this chashash, yesh ligzar, sheyoil get o chalitza. I'm sorry, get o maimar achrei chalitza. Again, it's exactly what we saw there in the English translation. That the Havamina was that after chalitza, we should validate get or maimar. Maimar, I understand, to require a get after the maimar. I don't know what the implications of what Isa to Krovos would be generated by this get that the Gemara thinks in the Havamina should be required after chalitza, or if it's not required, it would be meaningful. My ligza. So now the Amri is arguing that there's no room for Xer. Nigzar chalitza achar get. If after a get there was chalitza, which could mean one of two things: either he gave a get to Rachel, and then he gave chalitza to Leah, or maybe. No, I'm sorry. What did I just say? Forget about what I just said. If he gave a get to Rachel and then chalitza to Leah, or maybe he gave a get to Rachel and then he gave chalitza to Rachel, to the same Rachel. So that's chalitza liachar get. Nigzar chalitza achar get. Sheyoil maimar achrea latzricha get. That the maimar should be meaningful to require a get. And what would be the reason? Mishum chalitza achar chalitza. All right, this Rabbi Osai is way, 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 way above my head. I'm going to plead the fifth here, as they say in American law. You know, sometimes it becomes really, really complicated. But we have to deal with what we have. All right. So let me wish you good Shabbos, and if anyone's staying here for the next year. So we did Daf Nunamid Beis. And we stopped here towards the end of Nun Amid Beis, and then we'll do some Nida and then Mem Amid Beis. Okay then?
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you so much.